Tina, and I will just, emphasize our thanks for having us at this fantastic conference event space. Welcome to Data Talks, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to be able to host this event today. One of the things I'm most excited about is to share with you what our data world looks like in 2018, and then to peer into the future a little bit about what our collective data world will look like together in 2019. We are not only joined here by fantastic speakers, many CluedIn customers and partners, but actually the audience is represented by 52% of the top 50 companies in Denmark by annual revenue. And I think this all comes from the fact that we have a problem. The ambitions that we all share as companies with getting value out of data, with becoming data-driven, is quite high. Yet our ability to execute on these same ambitions is not meeting expectations. And for me, this is what Data Talks is really about. It's about bridging this gap, making sure that we can look towards those companies that have become data-driven, that are getting value out of their data with success, and to learn from them. To establish a plan of attack, a strategy on how we too will make 2019 the year where we all collectively get value out of data. And when I thought about showing our data world for 2018, I thought, what better way to do this than to actually let the data talk itself? So, just to give you a bit of an introduction to CluedIn itself. Many of you would know that we all have this problem with data. And at CluedIn, we help companies become data-driven. And one of the ways that we do this is we typically talk about the 4 pillars of becoming data-driven. And it all starts with making sure that we have a robust data integration story. Making sure that we have a consistent flow of data throughout our business to fuel the use cases that are based off data. I like to cheekily refer to it as the data lake that you actually want. And one of the ways that CluedIn takes quite a different approach to this is that there's this typical work involved, this friction involved, and even starting with getting value out of data, establishing a proper data foundation. And that all comes in the form of, classical blending data from different systems. And one of the things that CluedIn customers will tell you they like about the platform is that this is just not a necessity. That the ability to actually get up and running with over 150 pre-built integrations to enterprise software starts this journey for customers. And so really with this plug-and-play ability, the discussions around how is data connected to each other is something that is ingrained into the platform itself. Now, a good friend of mine who's actually in the audience just said to me just last week that data by itself really doesn't have any value. In fact, in today's standard, it's more seen as a cost and a liability. And I think these words are true. And so really, the next pillar to talk about and establish is the idea of setting a benchmark with our data. And one of the ways that we help companies and do this is to be able to score data on different metrics. So something as simple as completeness of records, accuracy of records, relevance of records, quality, validity, and staleness. Now, all of these sound very synonymous in the data world. But it's really about being able to establish all of the different factors that play a role into, I have data, but is it ready to use? So the next pillar is really around cleaning and data preparation. And most of you who have talked with the CluedIn team before will know that this is really the pillar that we focus on. Ironically and unfortunately, it's also typically the most skipped of all the steps and pillars in putting in a proper data foundation to fuel business use cases. Now, one of the things that CluedIn has done is essentially embedded an automatic piece in cleaning that takes care of a lot of the kind of normalization of data, a lot of the things that can be automated with today's modern technology. But we also can't forget that data engineers play a role in this as well. Data engineers need to be able to play a role in the curation of data. And for that, that's where we provide CluedIn Clean, the ability for really data engineers to dive into the areas of data that can't be automatically cleaned and prepared. And one of the more modern approaches that we've taken with the platform, and you will hear from many speakers today that will be touching on data culture. We see that as a pivotal piece of playing a role in establishing a proper data foundation for businesses. And so really, because of this, business users can use a machine learning platform we call CluedIn Train. The most relevant business user in the workplace can be asked certain questions to be able to add context, but to also be able to train the system to get better over time in the automatic cleaning piece. Now, we can't also forget that in this approach, it's not just a matter of putting all the clean data into one place. It's also important to have the functionality to be able to propagate this back to the sources, so we can have a consistent, holistic view of our data, no matter the tool, no matter the team. I really apologize to IBM, SAP, and Sage for describing them as broken systems in this example. I can see a representative of SAP in the audience is smiling. So, we're still not done. There are two pillars that are left. And really the next pillar that we need to be able to solve as businesses is around data governance. This really comes down to the key of we need to be able to use our data with confidence. Making sure that retention policies are set, making sure that consent is managed. It really comes down to this. All this data, clean and accurate, is really still not foundational enough to be able to drive business value without making sure the policies with data are adhered to. So the third pillar would be data governance. Making sure that we're listening across our data foundation, our data fabric, for any breaches in policies. A classic example would be, this data looks like it's come from LinkedIn. We probably shouldn't have that. The final pillar completes the picture. One of the reasons that we often see companies struggling with being able to utilize data is the fact it's not accessible. And the typical kind of burdens, as we go from customer to customer, there's a theme, it resonates. Most of our customers will know that one of the ways that we achieve the results here is by offering a unified querying language across this foundation, meaning that we don't need to learn individual languages to be able to access our data. So this whole idea of, I need to talk to the CRM team to get an export of data. I need to talk to the HR team and they're not available right now. All this friction that usually makes it that we can't accelerate to innovation in large businesses. The unified access via a language called GraphQL gives us this functionality. I wanted to show you a couple of examples. Because for me, being from an engineering background, I actually, to some degree, want to be made jealous. I want to see what people are actually doing with their data to believe in that journey. So let's take a simple example, and I really appreciate these customers for sharing this with us. Let's take a simple example like this. Here we have a unified querying language that is allowing me to access across my entire data sources. I would like a list of all organizations that earn over a certain amount of revenue, that recently, within the last 30 days, got a funding round. And then I would like you to find all the employees that we know about there and the shortest path to our employees. You can see how this can translate to something you're probably used to in a system like LinkedIn. Who is the shortest path of communication to this particular customer? Another example that came out of a large telecommunication company here in Denmark that I'm sure many of you in the audience use. And that is, I would like all my support tickets where in the sales department the stage is at upsell. I would like to know the author of that ticket internally. I would like to know when's the due date. And I would like to find the most connected person we have at that business. I would like their email. So really, you can start to have the data tell a little bit of a story, in that this has given me all the pieces that I need of when that ticket is due, who's internally working on it, and who's the best contact at that company to ring or email. The next example goes into a different area. This example, I would like all companies where the quality of the data is over 84% and the accuracy of the data is over 88%. You can probably see how this use case, this is valuable for a machine learning use case. We'll be going into a couple of fun examples of how this is kind of necessary, this foundation of data, to be able to actually get practical value out of things like machine learning. And finally, and this is really based off the fact that it's probably of no surprise that if we look at the market trends, GDPR was actually the biggest topic in data for 2018. I talked before about using data in confidence. So really here I have a very global query, go find me people where we have this particular consent and bring back that data. These are just some of the examples of what you can do with a data foundation in place. And one of the reasons why we talk about this data foundation is because if you look at the data landscape today, it's pretty overwhelming. These are all the different components that we see at companies. Most companies have established a data warehouse. Most have a story around storage and cloud and their back office tools. Some have invested in maybe more modern, different types of technologies like a data lake. But I would challenge the room with this. I'll use an analogy. When you buy a database technology today, you don't buy a querying engine and an indexing engine and a storage engine. You buy a database. It's encapsulated that problem. It's abstracted that complexity away. And one of the reasons we see as a theme why companies are struggling with getting value out of data is because of this complexity. So we really believe that 2019 will be the year where companies need to establish a proper data foundation. The reason is that the business is very clear on what they need. Access to high quality, accurate data that is dispersed across the business that is ready to use, to fuel use cases like you see up the top. I think we are all aware, And I think that's also why we are represented by 52% of the top 100 Danish companies here. We are all very well aware we have problems. But I would actually like to use some examples so that it resonates. So the first example I would like to show is a very popular business intelligence tool, Power BI. And once again, I would really like to thank this customer for giving us this data, giving us this example. And the reason is because sometimes it's very hard to admit failure. So Power BI was backed by a data warehouse. Once again, this is a large business that many of you in the audience will be using. And the data warehouse was doing a fantastic job. Power BI was doing a fantastic job. The problems really lied in the source data itself. So many of you who use CluedIn will be used to these very judging scores that really start to score your data on a global perspective. Now, the irony, I guess, of this situation is that once we had switched out the fabric of CluedIn, feed the data warehouse through CluedIn instead of directly from the sources, we were actually able to establish that many of the decisions that were being made off these business intelligence tools, if we're talking about a binary type of decision, true or false, well, statistically, this customer would have been better off guessing. Another example would be this. I alluded to before that GDPR was definitely the number one topic of 2018 from a trends perspective. And too often, this was the kind of thing that disallowed companies from even trying to start this type of cleanup. Scattered, dispersed data, personally identifying with no overlap. Here's another example. You could argue this is one of the reasons why potentially putting in a technical solution to solve these regulation, data privacy, the data privacy movement was sometimes just too hard to think about. Now, the final example is one close to home. And many of you will know that you've probably seen this before if we've chatted. But it still makes me laugh every single time. Machine learning definitely has its place. There are many practical use cases of machine learning that can run in production. There are many that are just not there. So, in fact, 4 years ago, when we started to build this data foundation, this data fabric, one of the machine learning techniques that we had available in the platform was called image object recognition. You can probably gather the value that would be gained from something like this. Just simply being able to search across visual data to be able to easily more find what you're looking for is a good practical example. Now, this is 4 years ago. When we place a picture through of myself into the engine, this was from my brother's wedding. First of all, in the room, I would say probably it's done a relatively okay job. I kind of would be skeptical. Why didn't it pick human? Why didn't it pick glasses? And most of you who are in the data science field will probably know that it's really down to the data that's being trained on, right? That there are newer techniques that can kind of transform learning so they don't need to see glasses to be able to determine they are glasses. But we're going back 4 years. So what you realize is one of the reasons we really need to make sure we have consistent, good quality data available to different teams is because if you put our CTO Martin through the same process, Martin is your classic looking Nord, long beard, long hair, death metal shirts. What I always find so funny about this was just how confident our engine was that Martin was a fur coat. So we know we have these types of problems, but Data Talks is very much about solutions. And like I alluded to before, we have fantastic speakers today that are going to help us all with forming our strategy. Whether it's about how we solve certain data culture issues, whether it's how we drive ambition to achieve clean data, how do we do that? Is it from above? Is it from below? Does everyone need to be involved? These are the types of topics that we'll be covering today. I strongly believe, and I will show you in a moment how the data helps us aid in this decision, that 2019 will be the year of the data fabric. And it will be the year where companies will have access to the data that sits across their business much more ready to utilize. And I, for one, am mainly excited to see how quick customers will be able to iterate and accelerate and innovate with this type of foundation. And so I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how companies are getting value out of good quality data. And it starts with our API. This is our sandbox to be able to play with data that sits within the fabric. And I'd like to, once again, thank this customer for giving us this example. So essentially, a stream of data was set up from the platform. The subscription to that stream was, I need to know all customers or all companies where the is customer flag is true. That data was pushed over to Microsoft Azure ML. Now this could be Google ML, this could be RapidMiner. And essentially the process was, will a lead turn into a customer? It was using historical data on those companies that weren't customers and those companies that were, to be able to form a relatively simple model to be able to utilize this in real time as new companies come into their fabric. And so really the way that this showed is through, it's relatively hard to see, apologies for that. Down here in Salesforce, what ends up is a lead to customer score. So the data is available where the people are working. This allows that team to be able to essentially prioritize by lead score. They're the companies that they'll focus on. There you go. So the next example I want to show is how a large US company with 135,000 employees, 124 different applications, can generate subject access reports for their customers in under 3 minutes. And finally, how our next customer was able to raise the overall accuracy, completeness, and quality of data, not to mention they now had the mechanisms in place to be able to do this over time. So to be able to look into 2019, I think it's very important to look at what were the trends in 2018. I alluded to before that it's probably without no surprise that GDPR was the #1 topic according to trend data, followed closely by machine learning and big data. And if we drill down into this trend data and take something like the data warehouse, a technology which most of you in the room would have, we can see that over this year, it maintained consistency in popularity, kind of peaking more towards the start of 2018. If we then pull a more modern type of terminology into the mix, the data lake, you can see that still worldwide, that potentially there was trepidation in adopting this new technology, however still maintained some popularity, not as significant as the data warehouse. If we throw a buzzword into the mix, one of the stories that you could extrapolate from this is that potentially either companies are struggling to correlate marketing trends to technology. We could also correlate that maybe technology is only one piece of the overall solution to be able to solve these type of marketing trends. If we throw GDPR into the mix, the story becomes much more obvious how much of a reactive business environment we are. Then in fact, really only the months surrounding May was where really the main popularity came up. And also, I think you could attest to the fact that although GDPR itself as a term has lost a lot in the trends, it's really mainly around data privacy is still trending quite a lot in our industry. And with things like CCPA and PSD2, they of course show up quite significantly in the current trends as well. Now this next example I'm really not very proud of, and I shudder actually as I use it, but I thought using a pop culture reference would put some perspective on just how small our data world is. So if we put Kim Kardashian, you can see how much it dominated compared to our world. I think one of the great things for society is at least data privacy at one point was more important worldwide. Let's head back to machine learning as the next keyword. And one of the things to mention here is that over the last 12 months, machine learning was actually a bigger trend. If we look at 2018, GDPR was the biggest trend. And this next example will just put us in our place. The number one searched keyword of last year makes that GDPR is a blip on the radar. I think this is one of the pieces where really data can tell a story. Let's go local. If we bring this into Denmark, we can see how volatile our market is here. That there is potentially a lot of sporadic nature to what technologies should we be using. If we throw the data lake in, we can see the same type of volatility. As we throw big data in, you can see it's still a big thing, but maybe Denmark has a closer correlation between technology and marketing buzzwords. As we throw GDPR in, I think we should probably all feel good the fact that data privacy was so much more significant to us versus worldwide. If we use this example as well, I feel very proud to live in this country. So, for 2019, really, we've been using this type of data, talking to different companies, talking to different customers, to establish this fact that the old ways of solving data problems is not scaling. We are not able to meet the demands of the business because of this inability to have a foundation of good, clean data that's available across the business. And for this, one of the ways that we're helping is by announcing our next version of our platform today. So for all of the customers in the room, you'll actually just be able to reload your account right now, and you'll have the version 3. Really within this, you've got improved search, improved user interface, improved data exploration, easier ways to clean data, and much more efficient use of infrastructure, bringing costs down. If we take a look for 2019, Of course, really it's important for people to be able to put these data foundations in place. One of the pieces of work we did with a company around the lead to customer scoring gave us this idea that really in the data world, especially in the kind of machine learning, business intelligence, advanced analytics, you don't go far in the media without listening or seeing that 60, 70, 80% of a data scientist's time is spent in cleaning and preparation of data. It's such a limited amount of time in actually being able to choose algorithms, tweak algorithms, manage in production. And for that, the first thing I would like to be able to announce to help companies get a data foundation is what we call CluedIn recipes. Of course, the analogy is that really to be able to get value out of machine learning, it starts with good quality data. It starts with setting some types of parameters that to be able to enable this type of functionality, I need 80,000 company records, I need 88% accuracy, etc., etc. And then from this, I actually get to choose which platform I would like to use to activate this functionality. Now, there you go. So the choice really comes down to what platform would you like to use to be able to do the crunching of machine learning for you. Now, many of you who have been using the platform for some time will know that CluedIn Clean is the tool for data engineers to solve things like, in one system we call it gender, in another system we call it sex. We represent it as male and female in one system, 0 and 1 in another. And one of the most actually requested pieces to help companies become data-driven is, right now the way the platform works is that because we're scoring this data on different metrics, we actually know where the dirty data is. And we load that up for you, or data engineers, in CluedIn Clean. One of the most requested pieces was, I want to be able to manually choose what I want to clean today. So that will come in 2019. Not to mention an update to the user interface. And this is a good example. What we found over time is that typically the tools that we as data engineers use to clean data, it's in this tabular view, does a really good job, but sometimes it's really hard to understand the context behind the data. Just something as simple as being able to show flags against records, being able to highlight where there's potential issues to make the data engineer's job easier. If we take something like the gender field, one of the other things we need to be thinking about is that we need to view our data from different angles. So if we take this same data and view it like this, it tells different stories. It tells us inconsistencies in our data. It tells us we need to normalize this data. Not to mention, if I look at the same data in this view, it's very easy for me to realize I might not have customers in that location. I might have entered the wrong longitude, latitude, something that's very hard to actually know by just looking at those raw values. Now, speaking of data exploration, one of the other things that the pivotal design platforms of the data foundation, and this is an ethos that we stick to time after time, is there are 15 database families today. But yet we still try to solve our data problems with one or the other. Now, at CluedIn, you'll probably already know this, but we use 6 different database families to store the same data. And one of those is a graph database. Now, most of you would know to be able to query that data, there were already available interfaces for that. But that will natively come into the platform, not only to help you understand where there is dirty data, but to show you an ability to explore the different connections. And finally, when we're talking about data governance, it would not be a data governance platform without proper data lineage. And to have this ability, a traceability, to be able to see where all the data came in, where it was changed, who changed it, that traceability will also come in a second version in 2019. So with that, I would like to kick off the day. I would like to introduce our first speaker.